I got to be honest, I was looking forward to this forecast video this morning. There are kind of two scenarios with which I don't look forward to putting a forecast together, or maybe the forecast video together. One is when there's just not much weather to talk about. Things are very calm. There's not much going on. That is not the case this time. Maybe the other scenario is when I just don't have a handle on the pattern. There's too much uncertainties, and that's not the case this time. I think we have a decent handle on where this is going. There are some uncertainties. There's some disagreements, I think, in the long range. That's always the case in meteorology, but we have to talk about those. But that can be fun as well to try to piece together which way this thing is going. And, I talked to Eric yesterday. He mentioned this in the video as well. The differences between the ECMWF and GFS next week are profound. I kind of mentioned that I thought, at least 24 hours, 48 hours later, the models tend to cave toward one or the other. The GFS will eventually cave to the Euro, or vice versa. I don't want to. The Euro sometimes caves to the GFS. Doesn't happen quite as often, but it can happen, and it'll probably happen this winter a few times. And that hasn't happened yet at all. If anything, the models are just as diverged, if not more, next week, and there's some huge forecast differences, and that's always kind of fun to piece together which way that's going. So we'll talk about all of that. As far as fair or boring weather is concerned, you can just look at the national radar mosaic here this morning, and we can rule that out. We have a line of thunderstorms moving through Alabama into Georgia, right along the state line there. If you look closely, those are weakening here this morning. That's common, kind of morning presentation, but still nice bow echo there. And plenty of rain here through the Ohio River Valley. We have winter precip up here in the upper Midwest. You can we call this kind of glaciated. Do you see that look on the radar where it's a little bit smoother, maybe more linear, and this is more splotchy, for lack of a better word. And that kind of tells us this is probably more winter precipitation. And that's the case with some snow coming down in the Dakotas. Now, out ahead of it in Minnesota and Wisconsin, we have some warmer temperatures here this morning. I think I have those pulled up on a slide. So you're actually into the 40s early this AM with this low pressure here pulling this warm air up. And that's preventing more snow falling yet. Snow's coming, and we have winter storm warnings posted for a lot of those counties, particularly northern Wisconsin and portions of central Minnesota. So plenty of active weather going on across the central and eastern part of the country here today. I want to focus quickly on that snowfall for the upper Midwest. This is the 3-kilometer NAM forecast for precipitation and type. So we can see that snow falling early here this morning. Let's make this valid about the recording this 6 a.m. Central. There's that snow coming down, but remember, we're warmer out ahead of it. As we track through the morning hours, 10 a.m., 11 a.m., decent residence time, how long the snowfall is falling over the same areas here, up near Fargo and south, now getting to central Minnesota, Sioux Falls, eventually transitioning over this evening. This is now tonight. And the Twin Cities, northern Wisconsin here getting in on this. And this is increasing in rate. It's kind of hard to see with that color bar there, but increasing precipitation rates here for the upper peninsula of Michigan. And that low just kind of sits here. I mean, we're all the way now Wednesday afternoon, and this has only moved in 24 to 48 hours, about that far. So plenty of snowfall coming for the upper peninsula, portions of northern Wisconsin. And then by Wednesday evening, late tomorrow, we begin that lake effect snow machine both here on Lake Erie and off Lake Michigan and Lake Superior. You can see these bands being resolved from the 3-kilometer NAM. So decent snowfall event, potentially significant, very significant for the upper peninsula of Michigan, where frankly they're pretty used to snow even here in late November. Just quickly playing that ECMWF snowfall forecast out. Let's take this through Wednesday evening, and then we'll go through Thursday, get that lake effect snow resolved. And you can see decent swath of snow, 4 to 8 inches plus here through the Dakotas along the state line, through central Minnesota, upper peninsula, northern Wisconsin here. Twin Cities, kind of an interesting forecast case here this morning. Having about 4 to 5 inches. I think there's a spread here. It could be anywhere from 2 to 6, depending on how long we get that snowfall, when it transitions this evening, how long that low kind of stays over Wisconsin before crossing the lakes into Michigan. But certainly accumulating snowfall for a wide swath here, and then the lake effect corridor downstream of those lakes in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. If we look at the MBM, just kind of a different opinion here this morning, a little bit more recent model run. This is a similar swath, but you'll notice the Twin Cities a little bit further north, so down now 2.5 inches on that model specifically. But man, look at some of these values here in the UP, up near 30 inches, talking 2+ feet of snowfall along the shores here of Superior, and then better chances for lake effect snowfall a little bit later as we go into Thursday and Friday for portions of Michigan and then the corridors along Lake Erie. Also want to mention further south, this is often the case with these lows as they come through this time of year. We have snow for portions of the upper Midwest, some kind of rain and snow lying along I-80, This case a little bit further north, and severe weather to the south. We looked at that line of storms moving through. That one's weakening now. I'm going to jump over. Let's update the all hazards. Oh, there's still a severe thunderstorm warning out ahead of that bow echo. So still producing warnings here. It's almost 7 a.m. Approaching into northern Georgia at this point. And the Storm Prediction Center does have that slight risk continuing today. That's not for the existing line of storms moving through. This is for potentially additional storms later this afternoon. In fact, if I jump over and just show you the HRRR forecast, let's get this valid about 6. Let's do 7 a.m. It's a little slow with that line moving through because we just looked, it's almost 7 a.m. That line's all the way out here with a warning kind of right along the state line. So HRRR a little bit slow. But later this afternoon, 2-3 p.m., storms go up again. These have the potential to be supercells over Alabama, portions of far eastern Mississippi, and through Tuesday evening, potential tornado threat through here. Now, I'm not too concerned by it. The Storm Prediction Center has gone up to, I think, a 5% tornado risk, so potentially a few reports. We had some weak tornado reports yesterday, kind of near the Houston metro area, and wind reports from that bow echo overnight in Alabama, and then one tornado report here along the river in Mississippi. Jump back, just look at temperatures again. We looked at these earlier this morning, but we do have some milder temperatures moving up into the Midwest out ahead of that low. That's going to be changing as that low translates from like Minnesota, Michigan, and east over the next 48 hours. There's this cold front kind of waiting to swing through, and it's going to have its eye all the way to the Gulf Coast. So follow that along with these minimum temperatures here. This from the NDFD, National Weather Service temperature forecast. Minimum temperatures tomorrow morning coming down on the backside, 20s in the upper Midwest, 30s through the Midwest. You can even see Oklahoma City, 35, Fayetteville, Arkansas, 32, Little Rock down to 41. But it's really Thursday morning when those lows reach down into the 40s all the way along the Gulf Coast, the Atlantic coast, 30s, along the Tennessee Valley, low 30s near freezing, and potentially some freeze warnings being reposted out for portions of Alabama and northern Georgia as well. And much colder temperatures back up into the northern plains, down into the single digits. And that continues on Friday. Look at that, 27 near Atlanta, 24 Nashville, so deep freeze again here this weekend. Friday morning, Saturday, those colder temperatures pushing all the way over to the Atlantic coast, up into the metro areas, New York, near Boston, down to 24. But warming up on the backside. So we have another system coming through. This is now Sunday. And I'll just take this all the way Monday, Tuesday. Another system coming through this weekend. It's going to kind of recycle this flux of warm air and then the cold air on the backside of it. And next week, much cooler air coming in. We'll talk about that in the long range in just a second. Now, I do want to pivot from like this early forecast to kind of bigger discussion here. I'm going to take you way over. So we were just looking over here. There's the continental U.S. Here's Japan. Here, kind of orient ourselves. Here's the North Pacific Jet, which we're going to watch all winter long, especially for California, but also the rest of the continental U.S. right now kind of focused on Washington and British Columbia. But I'm actually not looking at the North Pacific Jet here this morning. Now, we do have this kind of surge of momentum off Japan that's going to be relevant for late next week in the forecast. Kind of take a peek at that. Nice extension of the jet streak over there near Japan. But what I'm actually looking at is this feature here. That's something that Eric talked about yesterday. Now, it doesn't look like much, but what my eye is seeing is kind of two things. You see this little increase in jet stream level winds just north of the equator, which is right here. And there's kind of this mirrored piece of it on the other side of the equator, right there. And this is more of the subtropical jet. This is way down. It's almost really in the tropics. Kind of the subtropical jet's more like up here. And so there's this little kind of increase in jet stream level winds just about the equator, kind of mirrored on either side of it. This is the beginning of that coupled Kelvin wave that Eric mentioned yesterday. And this is going to be moving over the next 7 days this way along the equator. They must move west to east, kind of part of their dynamics. And so we're going to see it move as I play this forecast out. I'm going to go kind of day by day here. So take it into later today, and you'll see that it was centered like right here at the start of this video. This is, by the way, we're going to return to this. This is the 180 longitude and 180 west, and I'm going to play that forward again. And let's take this now into tomorrow, and you'll notice it was centered like here today, but tomorrow that kind of mirrored, almost like a bubble, if you will, of these jet stream level winds has shifted to the east a bit. And let's take it into Wednesday, and it's now shifted kind of over here. And we'll take it all the way into this weekend, and now it's shifted, more so over into the Eastern Pacific. And I bring this up because if I take it even a little bit further out, and I pull it back here, we now have it influencing our subtropical jet stream, which is flowing into North America. And I think this is going to be relevant for some of the forecast differences that we're seeing from the GFS, from the ECMWF next week. Now, it's hard to see where that Kelvin wave went, but it's kind of somewhere embedded in the flow here, impacting the subtropical jet stream, actually increasing it, heading into the southwest, heading over Mexico here. And that's going to interplay with this trough that's moving down. We kind of glossed over that as we skip through the time frame here, but we have a trough moving into the central US next week. This is all the way out now, the 29th. So we go through this weekend, and we're going to have to watch this as far as it impacts that Saturday into Sunday forecast. And I think it's going to add some uncertainty as this Kelvin wave works its way all the way through the equator on next week's forecast. And I often say, that's fine and dandy, you kind of show me the analysis on these different plots, but can we see it? Can we actually see that Kelvin wave on satellite? It's kind of hard to kind of picture it here. And the answer is yes. If you actually look over, here's 180 west. Remember we showed you that longitude? I said I was going to return to it. If we just look at infrared satellite here, because it's dark right now, here's Hawaii, by the way, we see a lot of convection, and we call them convectively coupled Kelvin waves because there's often quite a bit of convection associated with them. And there's that jet stream response. You see those high clouds streaming to the east? And there's another piece to it down here that's kind of off the screen south of the equator where you're in the southern hemisphere and there's that mirrored piece to it. So we're going to watch this track east to west as we head toward this weekend, and it's going to help strengthen the subtropical jet stream that's flowing in to the southwest and ultimately into Mexico and Texas. Now, we often visualize this. I think Eric did this yesterday on these Haber-Muller diagrams. So where we see kind of rising air at the equator, because that convection produces the rising air. We see that jet stream level response. Now, right now, where is that rising air along the equator, which is what we're looking at kind of here, mirrored up here? Well, it's right here. And if we could attach a longitude to that, we can, because that's on the map. It's right at 180. At least it was at 0Z. We're at about 12Z now, so move this right over here. So we're about here, just east of 180 is where that convection should be centered on this forecast here from the ECMWF ensemble. Always go look at the actually what's happening. It's one thing to look at the charts, but can we see it happening? Well, yeah, we just looked. We just saw it on infrared satellite. There's that Kelvin wave. So we're going to watch that work west to east, and if this forecast is correct, that's going to be tracking very quickly by this weekend. It's going to be all the way over here on the 30th, right here, kind of helping to push that jet stream into Mexico. So again, we should be able to see this on this jet stream level forecast from the ECMWF. I'm going to take this forward. Here's the trough exiting east with that system that we started with this morning. We have that next trough diving down. This is now Friday the 28th. Remember, by the 30th, 29th or 30th, we should be seeing this enhancement to the subtropical jet stream. Here comes this next trough out of Idaho. And there's this extension, if you will, of the subtropical jet stream increasing now over San Antonio. That trough now coming out from Idaho into Oklahoma on the ECMWF. This is now Saturday at noon. And those kind of combine to form this low somewhere here near Cairo, Illinois. That's spinning up and producing our next wintry weather event somewhere over the Midwest this weekend, Saturday into Sunday, maybe even Saturday night. And I believe that Kelvin wave's giving it a little bit of an extra kick because that low is kind of meeting up with the subtropical jet, and that's kickstarting that low pressure this weekend, not next weekend. Now, if we put this together on the ECMWF forecast, let's play this into 6 a.m. here this morning. That low kind of centered somewhere over here, maybe one piece to it here, one piece to it here over Illinois and Iowa. As that moves to the east, we're going to see that snowfall fill in behind it. Rainfall today moving east into New England. Not much snowfall out ahead of it. More so just on the backside. We talked about the severe weather overnight in Alabama, western or eastern Mississippi. Weakening tomorrow as far as the precipitation goes out ahead of the system, but the snowfall just, coming down in bunches over the UP, portions of Ontario, and then the lake effect behind it. Here comes that next system. This is the next trough that we talked about impacting the Pacific Northwest here on Thursday, 2 days from now. Into Washington Thursday evening, now into Friday morning. That low centered somewhere here, and this is that next trough coming down. Snow across much of Montana at this point. Remember that trough now coming out of Idaho, and it's producing this low here, western Oklahoma. But remember, this is the 29th. There's that subtropical piece, seeing the rainfall over Texas. That's going to help kickstart it up into the Midwest. We see deeper cyclogenesis now over central Oklahoma, eastern Kansas, snowfall forming well out ahead of it at this point in Iowa, portions of Missouri, Illinois. This is just the ECMWF forecast. We have to compare it to the GFS, which is quite different. That low now moving through on Sunday morning, right through the Mississippi Valley, through the Ohio Valley now on Sunday, with a snow swath following it in this corridor here, portions of Iowa, Illinois, Indiana. We'll look at that in a second. Rainfall to the south, could see some severe weather, maybe as we go through Saturday evening along the Red River, the south. Because of the orientation of the trough, I'm not too worried about the severe weather threat from this. Could be a weaker one like what we've seen this week or early this week with kind of weak tornado reports and some wind reports, but not expecting a significant event. I think the wintry weather piece will be more significant on the northern edge of it, and then that tracks through on Sunday through New England, where that snow line well off to the north, up into Canada, portions of the upper elevations in New England, and that tracks through late next week. I'll kind of end the forecast there. That's right out at kind of 7 days at this point. Now, if we look at the snowfall forecast quickly, we can see that more significant swath of snow through Iowa, central Illinois, look at western Michigan over Detroit, northwest Ohio, Indianapolis kind of missing out here. This is a decent chunk of snow here over the next 7 days, but much of that falling here. This is now Friday. Let's take this into Saturday at noon. Snow now coming down during the day on Saturday in Iowa, Illinois, portions northeast Missouri. Filling in more significantly overnight through like Peoria, near Galesburg, Quincy, Illinois, Chicago. Look at that, Chicago, 10 inches. Portions of western Michigan, up near a foot. That's commingled right with the lake effect that's expected even earlier than that. And that rain snow line pushing more so up into Canada as that system exits to the east there. And I'll stop it there. This takes us to like Monday of next week. Now, another way we can kind of visualize this is let's just ask the ECMWF ensemble the probability of reaching 1 inch or more of snowfall. Let's call that like you've reached accumulating snowfall. If we take that through the first 48 hours, there's the upper Midwest snowfall that we talked about, kind of shifting off up into Canada, except for the lake effect there. And then if we play it out through this weekend, filling in all the way from central Illinois to northern Indiana, Ohio, and Iowa, much of like in the eastern half of the state there. And now if I play this forward, we didn't talk much into next week, but we do have the potential for another kind of reinforcing low along that same track here late next week. The GFS, much different forecast right now, but ends up with kind of a similar snow swath. I'll talk about that in just a second. One to look at the probabilities of reaching 6 inches plus. That's getting into like significant snowfall. Plows are running heavily. Obviously getting into that territory in northern Wisconsin, upper peninsula of Michigan. But if I play it out next week, here's Saturday evening through Sunday, 50 to 60% chance of that. Eastern Iowa, northern Illinois, Chicago metro area, portions of Michigan, and then the lake effect corridors here. And if I play this through next week, some of that filling in now, Wisconsin, northern Illinois. I didn't talk about precipitation much, but with that low swinging through the next week in that corridor here, more significant precipitation to the south. I don't know if we'll quite reach like 3.5 inches here in Louisiana, but definitely a good round of precipitation coming through this area, and we need it. This area has gone over dry here over the last 60 to 90 days. We talked about that last week. The ECMWF not quite as bullish on the kind of higher end totals for that rainfall, but definitely getting up over an inch in a lot of this area here across the southern, central, and even the upper Mississippi Valley through the next week. All right, want to jump over. I mentioned the differences between the GFS, and I'm going to play this forecast forward. We're looking at the 300 millibar wind speeds, really looking at the jet stream. I'm going to play this forward quickly because we talked about a lot of this, that first initial system coming through. All right, there's that. We'll call it the Idaho trough. We were kind of mentioning that just a second ago. We see that on Friday, and you'll notice here the subtropical, resurgence or the extension here from the Kelvin wave is not quite as strong from the GFS. We could kind of almost draw a line even by like Friday, all the way from up near the equator in toward Texas. It's not quite as strong from the GFS. It is there. It's here over San Antonio, but that trough as it exits Idaho on the GFS by Saturday does not dig down into western Oklahoma. It stays a little bit flatter, races through Wyoming, and it's like here over Fort Collins by Saturday, early Saturday morning. And that means by Saturday at 6 a.m., being by Fort Collins, it's now heading out near like, it's in toward like Kansas City, now through northern Missouri. And by like Saturday at 6 p.m., this thing has already flattened out. It never really met up with that subtropical extension, maybe from that Kelvin wave that we talked about. And it's raced all the way through the Midwest by Saturday evening. If we jump over and look at the ECMWF at that same time period, like there's Saturday evening, midnight, we have a full-blown low and a amplifying trough here. But we go back and look at the GFS, and it's a kind of washed out trough all the way through the Midwest, 6 hours before on Saturday at dinner time. It never met up with that subtropical jet. And what this actually allows is for this trough coming in behind her to dig a little bit deeper, and it produces a more deep low pressure system early Monday, which then forms a deeper low as we go out through Tuesday of next week, and we get a more significant winter system kind of cutting through that same storm track that the ECMWF had this weekend. So wildly different forecast presentations that end up bringing a relatively similar snow track. We'll look at that in just a second. Now, I didn't take the ECMWF jet stream forecast out into next week because I wanted to talk about this weekend's implications. But if I do that, you notice that deeper low that it tries to form, this ends up becoming too positively tilted, meaning this trough is kind of tilted back this way rather than this way. Kind of see that here, positive tilt to the trough. And it struggles to form a deeper low. It kind of quickly, that jet streak quickly swings into New England. We will get a low out of this out ahead of it, but it kept a lot of the precip down here, and it didn't get a lot of backside precip later in the week. This is now Tuesday, December 2nd. If in fact I play this out, here's Tuesday, December 2nd. All right, some snow here in the mid-Atlantic, more precipitation here for the southeast, and maybe a little bit of a dusting here through midweek. I'm going to compare that to the GFS forecast. There's the upper Midwest snowfall that we talked about from the GFS, the weakening precip across the east and New England by Thursday. Okay, let's find that Idaho trough. Man, you can almost look at how quickly it phased from Idaho to Wyoming on Friday. Look at how fast the GFS is moving. Now by Saturday midday, this low is all the way over here. We don't have this deep low forming in Oklahoma. It's like this very weak low over northern Missouri. And it quickly swings the snowfall through, much weaker precip to the south, a little bit more vigorous near Houston here, but by Sunday at 6 a.m., this thing's already washed out heading east. Very weak low moving through. Now it's allowing that trough to dig deeper in here. It's consolidating a much more significant low pressure system. First piece of that swings through, just a precip out ahead of it. This is Monday, December 1st, but remember, this took a while. It's just kind of bubbling down here. Heavier precip here across the southern Mississippi Valley. Much stronger now by Tuesday. And here comes this next low up through the Midwest on Wednesday morning with snowfall all the way here through the Ohio River Valley. That cuts through near Pennsylvania. So much different forecast. This point by Tuesday to Wednesday, the ECMWF had just had this kind of clipping system here coming through the southeast with just a little bit of mid-Atlantic snow. So big differences between the GFS and ECMWF at this point. The snow swath next week, there's that first initial round Saturday, much weaker. We don't get anywhere close to 10 inches in western Michigan or the Metro metro area of Chicago. Maybe actually a little bit better for Missouri initially. But then we get a second low coming through next week, Wednesday to Thursday. That's actually a little bit stronger with respect to that winter precipitation. Now, I highly doubt we're going to get 2 feet or close to it in portions of Pennsylvania or northeast Missouri, but just additional rounds of snow coming through by midweek on the GFS it allows it to pile up a little bit here on some of these model runs. And that's a much different way to get more heavy snowfall into this corridor than we saw from the ECMWF. Now, we're going to lean on the ECMWF solution. It's been a little bit more accurate. Eric just showed you that yesterday. But on occasion, the European model will cave to the GFS. It's kind of too early to say as of yet, but definitely leaning toward that ECMWF solution where it's really that Saturday to Sunday system where the bulk of that snowfall is going to fall. Curiously, if we just look at the raw precipitation totals, rainfall plus snow from the GFS, not too different from the ECMWF. Other than that, it has those higher values here along the Gulf Coast with that system kind of bubbling up a little bit further. It has another 48 hours to kind of form down there. All right, that takes us through 7 days. Doesn't give me a lot of time to walk through the kind of long-range forecast, but did want to cover a lot here, so I'm going to do it quickly. Fortunately, Eric covered a lot of this yesterday. The big story that we've been watching out into next week is this Northeast Pacific ridge. It's been pretty dominant at this point in the forecast. We talked about it even last week as being dominant in the kind of long range. And one difference I've noticed between the GFS and the ECMWF, at least as it relates to later next week, is as that ridge builds in, GFS struggles to cut off a low near California. This is the ensemble. You can see it tries to, on Sunday and Monday, but we mentioned that this ended up digging down into a deeper trough here across the Midwest, and that doesn't leave kind of a cutoff low near California. If I compare that to the ECMWF ensemble over the same time period, like Sunday and then out into next week, we do have a little bit better of a cutoff here near California. I'm going to take this out a little bit further to try to compare. See a little bit of that from the GFS, but it's much stronger on the ECMWF. So the ECMWF solution in the long range later next week, I think wetter for Southern California. This looks a little Santa Ana-y to me, how that low kind of comes in from the interior to the exterior. But the fortunate part of that is if we have a significant Santa Ana event, we've had so much water down here. I'm not nearly as worried for that wildfire threat. So potentially next week, looking at a Santa Ana event and then heavier rainfall for Southern California. But again, less concerned about wildfires as a result of that. We talked about some of the precip next week. I'm going to play this forecast forward from the ECMWF ensemble. And we start to see that ridge retrograde to the west north of Hawaii. That allows deeper troughing to build in to Western Canada. But curiously, and Eric talked about this too, we have another trough here across the Canadian Maritimes and like Eastern Canada, south of Greenland. And it's not often that we get, two deep troughs in across North America where Alaska goes cold and the far eastern part of the North American continent go cold. And so I'm kind of curious to see where this is going. We're seeing them with the GFS ensemble and the ECMWF ensemble. If I play this out, kind of same time period, this is all the way next weekend. There you go. Deep trough here for Western North America, deeper trough here for Eastern North America, and potentially a ridge here over the south or the southeast. This is late next week. I'm kind of curious to see how this plays out. I think there's a lot of uncertainty as we go through next week for obvious reasons. One, you saw the differences between the GFS and the ECMWF, how that plays out, how this ridge retrogrades, whether we get this cutoff low near California, how long that lingers. There's a lot of, I think, forks in the road that could muddy this long-range forecast. So I'm not going to sit here and kind of paint exactly what I think is going to happen by next weekend. I think one thing that's for certain is both of these kind of long-range models have plenty of cold air in this area here. We can actually just see this from the 9 panels where if we look at the 2-meter temperatures out next week, plenty of cold air across the Midwest and central Canada, the Canadian Shield, and that persists in the long range. I mean, that's just a lot of cold air across the North American continent with chances to intrude down into the Midwest or the eastern U.S. Now, part of the reason I'm kind of skeptical on it being cold here and over here is I think at some point the West goes warmer. There's just so much cold air kind of building in here that I think is going to swing through, that it will allow ridging to redevelop over the western U.S. And it's not clear on the models when exactly that could develop, but I think that is one possibility as we get further into December. Eric talked about the MJO transition 7-8 into 1. We're looking at that. That's largely due to that Kelvin wave. So once that Kelvin wave finishes its kind of transit through, it's going to be curious to see where that MJO sets back up. Again, Eric mentioned the possibility that that sinking air could settle in over here in phases 5 and 6, and maybe through mid to late December we keep the rising motion over here, phase 8, 1 or 2, which tends to be cooler through the holidays. So curious where the MJO goes after this transition, if it pops back out over here or if it kind of lingers in this area. We won't know, honestly, for a while. The ECMWF extended model, this is the temperature forecast out through the month of December here, and kind of curiously goes cool in the east and cool in the west. I'm skeptical we stay cool in the west for December. I think if we're wintry in this quarter here, if we have a lot of cold air intrusions coming through this way, I would expect the west to go warmer at some point. And then they're just showing you the precipitation over the same time period. With the kind of flow coming out like this, there's your storm track up through the southeast. My skepticism on this, I don't know how wet we'll be in the west if we go over warmer. And this ridge here, Eric talked about it yesterday, has shown some staying power and some strength. So while we are getting precip through the southern Mississippi Valley, kind of mentioned just with these recent systems that they're kind of weakening as they move to the east. And I expect this ridge to start rearing its head at some point this winter and clipping this precipitation kind of, not dissimilarly from the forecast here where it has lower values here, but that could start to push further to the west as we go through December. We can actually see that ridge. If we look at the 500 millibar heights right now, centered somewhere over Miami. And this has kind of been moving and weakening back and forth in this quarter here as these systems come through. But as winter progresses, curious to watch where this goes if it strengthens and heads up near Tallahassee, or if it weakens and heads further out toward the Bahamas, that could modulate a lot of the precipitation that we're expecting in the southeast, because there's a lot of seasonal forecasts right now, a lot of agreement that drought is going to be an issue in the southeast this year. If it is, it's going to be because that ridge is getting stronger and gaining strength through the winter months. I didn't touch too much on those long-range precipitation chances right now, the 8 to 14 days. A lot of uncertainty right now. There's kind of two corridors with some confidence. One, the southeast, which we talked about, Southern California. Decent chances later next week with that potential cutoff from the ECMWF ensemble. I did mention the GFS wasn't quite as bullish on that cutoff, so we don't see as much precipitation through Southern California, but plenty for the southeast up into the eastern U.S., and GFS goes over a little drier in the west. The Climate Prediction Center, I don't disagree with them. They've just kind of gone over wet over a large area here, just given the kind of model differences right now. I don't think it's a bad thing to kind of sit in between at the moment. I will just mention that kind of southeast drought threat. We are still watching this potential here as we go through winter. And this was released just at the end of last week. And so this corridor here, getting rainfall in over the next kind of 8 to 15 days will be important if that ridge is going to rear its head again and push drier concerns back into this area. I'll leave it there today. I think I went full time at this point. If you made it to the end, I appreciate you watching, and Eric will talk with you all on Wednesday.